much, Ronan, A, for sponsoring the conference, and B, for providing us with the insight you're going to do from a version 1 perspective. As Ronan's head of advisory services practice at version 1, and he's worked with many public sector clients designing digital platforms, as well as leading the development and maintenance teams and providing consultancy services, so an all-rounder per se. Originally a mechanical engineer. Well, I won't hold that against you, because I'm from the other lot, the electrical engineers. But he's obviously switched allegiances because Ronan's recent work has centered on cloud architectures and digital strategies. So welcome on board from the mechanical fraternity, Ronan. He brings a focus on the engineering solutions to business problems. So he's taken that logic there and using digital technology to solve the current real world problems. And we've heard a few of them already around scale, etc., enabling ways of working and delivering innovative services. Ronan is going to provide us with his insights into transforming the public sector through technology. Take it away, Ronan.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you, Alex and Iggy, before. I think it's interesting that kind of idea that engineers somehow end up in technology. And the way I put it is, and this is really picking up on what Alex said there in terms of the mix of skills. What's really interesting is to have people who are focused on the problems and like solving problems. And engineers tend to do that, and they switch. And quite a lot of my team actually have an engineering background rather than purely in IT. So it's a topic I'd love to discuss at some point in more detail. I suppose one starting point here is the view that technology, digital, IT, but technology has always changed society before there was ever any kind of digital, and really thinking about that and thinking about the fact that fundamentally the services that we do as public service, as government delivers, actually they will always evolve. And we must continuously challenge ourselves to reimagine the services. And that's fundamentally a theme I'd like to sort of explore a little bit. When you take and make it personal as to when did my family start engaging with the public sector, one of the easiest ways to do it is to go and dig out something like this. This is the 1911 census. And somewhere in there is my grandfather, who was, I can't remember, is he age 6 or something like that, who's there and appears on that. And it's the first record that you get of, well, I suppose my family directly interacting with public sector, a census. And you kind of ask the question, well, what's the purpose of the census? It gives us all this statistical information to understand society, which allows us to define policy and actually decide how we should deliver the services. And one of the things that when you start imagining and you start asking the question is, what's technology doing to this? Well, we still run censuses, and censuses aren't that different to the census of Quirinius in 6 AD. And maybe if you lived in Nazareth, you had to go to Bethlehem. That 1911 census is off different to the ones that we run today. And actually, if you think about it, at the same time, there are lots of other information that's out there, and the public sector goes and does all sorts of real-time analytics on me that works out quite interesting things about me, some of which kind of come surprising when you dig out what's in Google and what are they using, and if they sell to other businesses who think this is also interesting. So it must be interesting. People are paying money for this. But actually, there's a lot of ways that we can find information that actually could allow us to set policy, to allow us to understand people's interests, the way they interact and their history. And actually, that's kind of a theme is to explore, well, actually, when we think about government and digital government, are we thinking in a frame of reference that is set somewhat unchanging, or are we challenging ourselves to reimagine how and what we do and actually following the trends that is set by industry? So I suppose the question is looking at characteristics of what is digital, and particularly in terms of public services, and certainly following on from Iggy, there's a lot that's citizen-centric. Absolutely, that comes first, comes very much top of the agenda, or maybe other services users. As we're servicing business, we're servicing not just citizens, but it's something in there. Now, increasingly, we're talking about services that are open, but certain other things change. And one of the key things in relation to digital is timely. If you think about that Google example that I showed, they're continuously categorizing collecting data, analyzing, and publishing in a timely way. And that's something that public sector has traditionally been very fixed cycles. It's also absolutely, they've built a business. It's all about data understanding. And actually, that's a key thing in terms of when we're talking about defining policy, actually using more data in defining policy, but also using data in how we service users interact. If we have their data, can we use their data on subject to data protection and all of that? And I guess on top of that, then we have a set of other trends that are emerging, trends for intelligence, trends for automation, trends for integration of the services. But these are kind of classic characteristics that when we begin to look at, they don't just talk about IT systems. Actually, fundamentally, this is about how we define. So defining the service, and very much following on from what Alex was saying there. Actually, this isn't an IT thing. This fundamentally is a business thing, and getting that connection back is probably the essence and the essential piece here. It might be a trivial statement to say that digital or technology-led anything, public sector, public service, is not the same as you might and should do it in paper. And actually, that's a very fundamental thing to actually challenge ourselves, how we define what it is that we do. I kind of see digital as starting with data, but we start trying to work out, well, what data is required to do what? So if we start with the objectives, actually expressing the objectives in terms of data, what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to achieve for society? What are we trying to achieve for the service user, for the citizen? We also look at processes. How do they do that, and who is engaged in those processes? And ultimately, we begin to use that to define systems. Now, I suppose the key thing for me is that actually the processes, and this is the point that was made there previously, the processes aren't as set in stone. Actually, as we imagine technology, we can change the process. We can change the process radically. And in fact, we should change the process radically. And that may also include adding additional stakeholders into that process and being able to define something which is quite different and quite different in terms of the richness, in terms of the effectiveness, in terms of what it delivers for the citizen. So the objectives, well, they're probably not really changing. We have multiple things that are tied to objectives, but actually how we get there changes. So just focusing on the process, you could say this is service design, but if we think about them as digital processes, at the core, it is who is engaged through that service, but fundamentally, we're talking about connecting probably different people together than was probably previously possible when we talked about a process that's driven off pieces of paper. So we have more stakeholders, more organizations, and we get to new ways of interacting. Obviously, that could be as simple as, are you using your phone? Are you using online portals? And COVID has obviously driven change from people engaging in physical ways to engaging in virtual ways to us. But also we're talking about the API ecosystem. We're talking about how we interact between agencies, between government bodies. And, somebody accessing our services as public sector, if the data already exists in the public sector, it comes to be a very simple question: is why would they be telling us again the data that we already hold? Maybe we're saying, well, you need to give us the evidence of your license. Well, we're the people who issued the license out of the public sector. Why are we asking you to provide evidence of the license and we hold it? Now, that's subject to boundaries and data protection and that type of thing. But we must challenge ourselves as to, if we are the masters of the data, why would we keep asking people? And ultimately, that gets into defining a whole new networks in terms of the who and the timeliness. We talked about when should you engage. And classically, there's too much of our processes that are defined in annualized calendars or something that suited ourselves, and actually really making services, making the interactions of the stakeholders tied to their business events, tied to the points when the data is created or when it makes sense for them, rather than a paper-based process, which is probably apply once on a piece of paper, or at the end of years make us a submission. Actually, there's a lot here that changes. And fundamentally, the when, the who, the how, it radically alters the definition of the service, the digital process design. There's some talk, and I'm kind of repeating again a theme that came from Alex there, the concept of digital platform and a digital platform for government. So obviously we do have Invest NI, not Invest NI, we have Access NI, we have digital end user portals for service users, but underneath that we have either shared services or bespoke services. And typically, just breaking them out into the major domains that come out here, we typically have concepts of process engines. applying logic to implement processes. We typically have elements where we capture data, structured data, and we also implement bespoke logic. So whatever the rules are, whatever the complexities, and they may tie into those process nodes. On top of that, we're getting in very much into components, reusable components. They may be software as a service, they may be shared components delivered to us as public sector, and they may be equally commodity things we buy somewhere else and bring in. But actually, increasingly, we're seeing architectures which are leveraging external services like this rather than build everything ourselves. And somewhere to the side, there's data. It's inevitably the case. No matter whether we're driving things off process or driving things off very much structured data, ultimately we'll need to be able to do analytics and reporting. And that's no different to the university example that was given by Alex. It is fundamental to the service design from the beginning that we expect we will have to leverage data for policy, for management, for better decision making in an ongoing way and in a strategic way. And outside of that, we're going to see interfaces. Now, that kind of concept, actually different scenarios lead to different flavors of that. And I'll just tease through just some rapid examples here. On the left is, and the background is InvestNI's portal for their support schemes. And certainly this year has meant a huge number of COVID-related support schemes had to be rolled out very quickly. And actually, they had invested over the last number of years in a very much configurable, form-driven platform, which allows them to do process automation and process configurability. And that has allowed them to rapidly roll out quite a lot of new support schemes to support COVID. So very much in the platform side, underneath it's Microsoft Dynamics, but that's not the point. The point is a configurable process engine allows configurable forms, allows rapid response to a crisis such as this. On the background in the right, it's probably a different example of how to get to a configurable end state. The Department of Agriculture in Ireland has a lot of farm payment schemes. I know that Iggy mentioned the DERA schemes here, but they have a mix of the big schemes and systems that are totally bespoke for those, but they've also gotten into the sort of what are called Pillar 2 schemes and built an engine to be a generic claims processing system, but a bespoke one meeting their needs. Now, individual schemes need extensions on that, and they're custom on top of that, but it's a generic platform itself built from scratch, bespoke, and that's what meets their needs. But the concept of generic absolutely allows them to more rapidly implement schemes. We have other examples, the Road Safety Authority there for the CVRT, the Commercial Vehicle Road Testing System in Ireland. Again, that's built on a Dynamics platform to give a generic platform, but it has a data extensibility to the side to allow all sorts of analytics and risk rating and feeding that back in, but very much built in a generic platform. And the last one to the front, the Child and Family Courts Advisory Service, who provide assistance to the courts in family law cases across England and Northern Ireland. Well, that's an interesting one, which is it's a bespoke system, but it's been modernized to use SaaS and cloud services, but fundamentally focusing on process efficiency, people efficiency. So looking at how their services interact with other organizations, building the integrations, and optimizing the processes. So it's cloud enabling that, cloud services enabling the system, but actually focusing very much on process and digital process design within that to optimize what they do. But it's still about people. And I suppose, look, the other point is, if digital is paper, digital isn't, we stuck a computer in. And that's kind of the mistake when people sort of say, oh, we've got it on a computer, it must be digital. Actually, the real transformation happens when we actually go beyond that. So, cool, we've had dog licenses for many years. There's an 1877 dog license. Well, if we added it on a computer and a plastic card, is that transforming? Well, sometimes we can be a little bit more efficient in how we do the processing, but that's not where the real transformation of government is going to occur. So yes, there are some things that are about simple transformation, and then there are other examples. So this, and picking up again, Iggy mentioned the DERA and the farm payment grants. Well, some of that is dependent on the farmer applying. Some of that is dependent on data that comes from other sources. So, for example, Land and Property Services actually map the fields, and the farmers use that data in the fields. And that's a very simple process by which, they're paying very large amounts of money into the economy to farmers in terms of farm support schemes, and multiple schemes depend on that data. So that's a very simple thing. But actually, the real transformation for us as public sector or as whole society, go beyond this, is when we start trying to say, well, that data about fields, about land, about farmers, about their activity, actually that feeds a whole series of things across the economy, across the public sector. And how do we use that data in a way that enables that? So into environmental compliance and regulation, it could be into health and safety, it could be equally into other forms of aspects of transfers. So for example, land transfers may go with them entitlements, the entitlement for payments, but ultimately there are banks, there are insurances, there are mortgages, there are many other parties involved against that same land. And so the more we can use identifiers, or the more we can help to feed other organizations who are part of that, and the more we understand that for the farmer, there are many people involved in what they do, and the more that they can use their data, we can actually really improve the experience for them. But actually, we can drive the effectiveness of other organizations, and that could be right the way through to HMRC or other organizations. And it's interesting to see Land and Property Services in terms of data model. One of the key drivers that they've done in their recent data model, the fusion data model they've implemented, is the idea of identifiers on their data that would be globally unique, that can be shared across organizations. So if this is a field and it has a life cycle, and it might be changed every so often when either land is sold or a building is built in it, actually the fact that that change can be notified and passed through, and multiple organizations can actually follow up on it, whether it is environmental impact or whether it is impact on a related mortgage, for example, that is held against that land. They are very interesting things and concepts. And that concept of data, and the data being a platform under which we can actually manage better our governance, that's a very sort of universal concept that allows us to challenge what traditionally, as I said, would be a paper process. You apply, you send me a form in a paper form, and I pay you money, or whatever it might happen to be. Actually, no, it's an ecosystem. So one of the things that's happening is intelligent technology. We've invested quite a lot in developing smart services through our innovation labs in version 1. And an example of that would be smart text analysis. And actually, one of the things that's talked about is when we start talking about, RPA, robotic process automation, or bots, or all these things. Actually, one thing that's often missed is sometimes it is to have straight through processing that is totally intelligent, but sometimes it is to empower our staff. So for example, we are using OCR of scanned documents, uploaded documents, often uploaded by agents, to make sure that those documents are loaded against the correct farmer. So that's an example where we're actually using intelligence to assist and protect against data protection or data breaches, which are a real thing, where we're getting documents which are loaded to the wrong place, which obviously impacts the processing of the right case, but also, more importantly, it represents the significant potential data risk to the rights of the individual. That kind of intelligent automation actually supporting people isn't about displacing the staff. It's actually about empowering and improving the process and service we've got. And so it's quite important that we look at intelligence and how we bring it into our systems. But there comes with it risks as we reimagine our journey and reimagine how we do processing. These are just 3 articles in Wired from since the summer that really resonated with me as we introduce intelligence, as we imagine those processes being end-to-end, as we put in models for the future where digital governance at the heart, actually we have to focus on the risks to the rights of our individuals. And we have to understand that actually our models that we like to create, and it could be dealing with the exam crisis this year, sitting exams. It's happened in all the jurisdictions. There's been some kind of crisis this year around the models that have been put in place. We have to challenge ourselves and understand that this is very, very hard. Building models of the real world is really hard. And so fairness, bias, as well as things like digital inclusion, access to the services in the first place, be it for the silver surfers, as Bill mentioned, But actually, we have to focus on that as we become more intelligent in the systems, and that is not easy. So the future is likely to go down the line of digital twins. We will continue to enhance the systems. We will build them into an ecosystem, which is a model, a digital model of the real world. There are many initiatives being driven at academia and in industry across this. And actually, it is just a continuation of the path that we're on, where we build models, where we integrate that data together in the services, how we build digital government, or in industry. And that is a trend that's happening. But this must happen with the proviso that we're thinking all the time of those risks. And this is the path that we're on. We will continue to enhance, and it could be land and land transfers, and then into the whole ecosystem of land. We will build a digital twin that models what happens in the real world, and it's at the core is data, and we will build up processes on top and the intelligence on top. But we must do so in a way that respects and understands the risks, and understands that at any time when we build a model, it's flawed in its multiple ways, but it can come to the fore to actually still support and be useful. So we touched on the fact that maybe as an engineer in college, I might have done something which was at 1 minute writing a model which was imagining the world was flat and imagining how therefore a piece of physics works on this flat world when I shoot a projectile in the air where it'll land. And the next minute I'm running a model which is imagining the world as a sphere, and I'm working out how far it takes to get around from point to point. But each of those are models, and the world is a slightly different shape altogether, with bumpy bits called mountains and so on like that. But a good model, you understand the bias, you understand the simplifications, and it still is a usable model. And digital twins is really the path for us there. So coming back to the end, so the future of defining digital public service is definitely citizen-centric. It's still all of these characteristics, but it becomes increasingly integrated, increasingly automated and intelligent, supporting either the staff that we have, the public sector, as well as some degree of automation. It is founded on data. It is founded on data captured when it makes sense in the processes in the real world, as distinct from ones that we define ourselves. So if that is farm data, we may be collecting data in the fields. We may be collecting the data when the farmer has planted. We may be collecting the data at a time that makes sense in the process, as distinct from once a year. That's an interesting piece. It may be open, so that we will take that data from the farm management systems, from other services out there, but fundamentally all comes back. It will be based around the citizen, the service user, and achieving the policy objectives defined off that. So that's just my little note from ourselves, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you very much indeed, Ronan, for that comprehensive run through all of the stuff on transforming public sector through the use of that technology layer. I've got a number of questions that I've posted on the Q&A board. I've also I'll just remind presenters that we do have an internal chat session there as well, so if you want to go and check on that. And for those who are delegates, please feel free to send in questions, and we'll try to answer them either electronically because we can, or I'll pull them out and put them in